The fresh scent of basil, mint, and rosemary filled the small dining area. The tables were carefully set, each with colorful flowers in simple glass vases. The main character paced back and forth, checking every detail of the opening night. That evening would be more than just an event. It would mark his personal transformation. After years of silence, he had finally chosen the path he wanted to follow. The restaurant wasn't large, but it had soul. The walls featured paintings by local artists, the furniture was rustic and cozy, and the warm lighting created a welcoming atmosphere. He remembered how many times he had imagined that scene during lonely nights while planning his future. Now everything was there before his eyes. Every detail told the story of someone who dared to step out from the shadow of tradition. Yet behind the happiness, there was the weight of expectation. He knew his family would be the biggest test of the evening. His parents, who owned a respected butcher shop in town, would never understand why he had chosen vegetarianism. More than that, they wouldn't accept their son starting a business that seemed directly challenging the family's legacy. Still, he held on to hope. He imagined his mother smiling when she saw his effort, his father trying to hide his pride beneath his stern demeanor, and maybe even his brother acknowledging his courage. After all, family is family, he thought. No one could deny the value of a dream achieved through such hard work. As he arranged the final dishes, his heart raced. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a silent statement of who he was. Every spice, every recipe represented a conscious choice, a piece of his soul served on a plate. The opening night wasn't just for customers, it was an invitation for his own family to finally see the real him. The clock showed just before 7. Childhood friends began arriving, greeting him enthusiastically. The dining area came alive with voices, laughter, and the sound of glasses clinking in celebration. He smiled, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door, anxious for the moment his family would appear. With every entrance, his hopes lifted, only to sink again when it wasn't them. Deep down, he felt a mix of faith and fear. Faith that his parents might understand his choice, and fear that his brother would turn his dream into something to be ashamed of. "Today is my day," he whispered to himself, trying to push away the heavy thoughts. The energy of the evening couldn't be spoiled by insecurity. When a friend brought him flowers and congratulated him, tears nearly escaped his eyes. Here was proof that even without family support, there were people willing to celebrate with him. The warmth of friendship gave him the strength to face whatever might come. This restaurant wasn't just about food, it was about building connections around something more meaningful. In the kitchen, the staff worked with cheerful energy, proud to be part of the opening night. Every dish that went out was full of color and flavor, a stark contrast to the simple, meat-heavy dishes the town was used to. This was new and different, and it challenged everyone's routine. The main character knew, for some, it would feel liberating. For others, it would feel like an insult. And even without having all the answers, he took a deep breath. This was his life, his choice, and no one could take that from him. The future was still uncertain, but one truth shone brightly in his chest. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Just like the main character, many of us have faced moments when we had to choose between pleasing others or staying true to ourselves. If you also believe in the power of moving stories about courage and identity, subscribe to the channel now and follow each chapter of this journey. A few days before the opening, the main character made a point of visiting each family member in person. He handed them the invitations himself, believing this gesture would show his respect and affection. His mother received him with a tense silence, his father with an unreadable stare, but it was his brother who shattered the fragile hope he was holding on to. "You think I'm going to support a place that preaches against our family's livelihood?" his brother said, not mincing words. The harsh, aggressive tone felt like a knife to the protagonist's heart. The invitation was left on the table, untouched, as if it were something poisonous. The room, which had always been a place for family gatherings, turned ice cold. The protagonist tried to explain that he wasn't against anyone,
that he was simply following his own path. But his words fell on deaf ears, crushed by his brother's contempt. "You're spitting on the legacy you're supposed to inherit one day," his brother added, his voice firm, his eyes full of accusation. It was as if his entire journey had been reduced to nothing more than an act of betrayal. His parents, unmoving, did not intervene. Their silence hurt more than his brother's words. There was no defense, no gesture of support, just an absence that weighed heavily on him. He walked away from there feeling completely alone, as if his own home was no longer his place. That night, lying awake, he thought about all the sacrifices he had made to open the restaurant. Every penny saved, every sleepless night, every doubt he had pushed through. All of it now felt small compared to the judgment of his own family. But giving up was not an option. He decided he wouldn't let his brother's rejection define his destiny. Yes, it hurt deeply, but the restaurant was more than just a business. It was a reflection of who he was. If he gave up now, he would lose more than a dream. He would lose himself. Deep down, he knew his brother's boycott was only the beginning. The whole town knew his family's butcher shop, and anything he did would be seen as a challenge. There would be gossip, disapproving looks, he was sure of it. Still, he prepared himself to face it all, pushing forward with a quiet determination.
His brother's words echoed like hammer blows in his mind. Betrayal. He had never thought his search for authenticity would be seen that way. But maybe, he reflected, this was life's toughest test, choosing between pleasing others or staying true to himself. Looking at the rejected invitation still lying on the table, he felt a mix of pain and liberation. If his choice caused such discomfort, it meant it had power. And where there was power, there was also a way forward. He wiped away his tears and made a promise to himself. He would keep going, even if he had to do it alone. The opening night arrived with a blend of anxiety and hope. The lit dining room, beautifully arranged dishes, and soft music created a warm atmosphere. Friends and curious visitors came in, full of compliments, and every word of encouragement soothed the protagonist's heart. Still, his family's absence hung like a shadow in the brightly lit space. As the first dishes were served, he smiled and thanked everyone, but his eyes kept drifting back to the door. With each new customer, his hopes rose, only to be followed by disappointment. Hours passed, and the restaurant grew busier, but the most important faces never appeared. Moving between tables, he overheard whispers of curiosity. Some remarked how bold it was to open a meat-free restaurant in a town known for loving meat. Others praised the fresh approach. He felt torn between pride and worry, knowing every opinion would travel beyond those walls, spreading through the town like wildfire. When a couple quietly asked, "His parents didn't come?" he felt his stomach tighten. There was no hiding it. His family's absence was obvious and had already become a topic among the guests. The emotional weight of their silence grew almost unbearable. Still, he held himself together. He greeted every table, made sure to explain each dish, and shared stories about the ingredients. He tried to show enthusiasm, even as sadness ate at him from within. It was as if he had to prove not just the quality of the food, but the very legitimacy of his dream. By the end of the evening, the customers left satisfied, many promising to return. The restaurant had shined, but to him, the victory felt bittersweet. The empty table he had reserved for his family remained like an open wound. In the kitchen, as he cleared the plates, he looked at the flowers he had specially chosen for his parents. Untouched, wilting in the corner, they symbolized the rejection he had feared most. It was as if in that empty space, his family had made their position clear. Even so, he felt no regret. He knew he had taken a necessary step, however painful it was. Life wouldn't let him turn back now.
The restaurant was part of who he was, and giving up would mean silencing his own voice. Walking home in the late-night chill, the cold air seemed to mirror the emptiness he felt inside. But deep within him, a flame still burned, the certainty that he was building something meaningful. And somehow, he believed that one day, his family would understand.
A few days after the opening, there was a family dinner at his parents' house. Hoping to reconcile, the protagonist decided to go. He walked in carefully, but was met with heavy stares. The atmosphere was thick, as if everyone was waiting for the inevitable confrontation. During dinner, his brother didn't wait long to attack. With his plate in front of him, he set down his silverware and declared firmly, "You've turned our family name into a joke. People are saying we have a traitor in the family, a butcher's son who turned his back on us." The silence that followed was suffocating. The protagonist tried to explain that his choice wasn't against anyone but for himself. He spoke about health, personal values, and his right to follow a different path. But every word seemed to be swallowed by his brother's contempt. Once again, his parents remained still, neither defending nor condemning him. "Don't you see you're spitting on the very table that's always fed you?" his brother pressed, eyes flashing with anger. "That restaurant isn't a dream, it's an insult." The accusation turned the meal into a battlefield. Every glance, every gesture carried judgment. The protagonist felt his chest tighten. What he had hoped would be a chance for dialogue had become a public attack. He realized his brother didn't just disagree, he wanted to destroy the legitimacy of his choice. His parents, silent, seemed trapped in their own indecision. Their silence was louder than his brother's harsh words. To the protagonist, their lack of support felt like the real blow, the feeling of standing completely alone. The laughter that used to fill family dinners was replaced by a heavy atmosphere. Fighting back tears, he barely managed to finish the meal. Each bite felt like a stab, every second a reminder that his achievement had been twisted into betrayal. Leaving the house, the night air felt colder than ever. He walked slowly, steps heavy as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His restaurant, once a symbol of hope, now felt like the start of a war. In that moment, he understood the road ahead would be much harder than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about food or business. It was about proving he had the right to exist as the person he'd chosen to be. The day after the dinner, the town seemed to breathe conflict. In grocery store aisles, on park benches, even at the bakery, whispers about the vegetarian restaurant spread like wildfire. "That's the butcher's son. He turned against his own family," some said. "How bold to open a place like that here," others remarked. Walking through the streets, the protagonist could feel the crossed looks following him. He soon realized the rumors weren't harmless. Customers who had promised to return gradually stopped coming. Reservations were canceled without explanation. The dining room, once filled with laughter and lively conversation, now had empty tables and waitstaff with little to do. The open wound from the family dinner seemed to have poisoned the entire atmosphere. Meanwhile, his family's butcher shop was thriving. His brother, capitalizing on the situation, gave speeches about tradition, respecting roots, and the cultural importance of meat in their town. Many saw him as the rightful heir to the family legacy, while viewing the protagonist as little more than a stray sheep. The contrast between their two businesses became increasingly obvious. The protagonist tried to stay calm, but every empty chair felt like a cruel reminder. More than losing customers, he felt he was losing the community's respect. The silent boycott felt like a collective judgment, and no one dared to stand by him. Still, a spark of resistance burned inside him. He knew giving up would mean handing his brother the victory without a fight. He prepared each dish with even greater care, striving to innovate and create flavors that could win over even the most skeptical customers. This was how he would fight, one plate at a time. A few friends tried to help by visiting the restaurant even on slow days, but they faced pressure too. Neighbors giving them sideways looks,
relatives questioning their choices. Supporting the protagonist had become an act of courage, and few were willing to pay that price. At night, when he counted the nearly empty register, his throat would tighten. The dream he had fought so hard for was under threat. Yet deep down, he knew that every struggle revealed the true value of what he was fighting for. This wasn't just about a restaurant. It was about his dignity. He remembered his brother's words, repeated like poison, "You have no future in this business." But he also remembered his own calloused hands that had planted every idea, the sleepless nights spent planning every detail. He couldn't believe it would all end here. The protagonist made a vow to himself. He would find a way to endure, even if it meant seeking support outside of town, even if it meant completely reinventing his approach. This fight was only beginning. The family dinner had left deeper scars than the protagonist had imagined. At home, his parents' silence echoed louder than his brother's harsh words. There were no phone calls, no visits, just a void that weighed heavily on him. As if through their silence, they had already chosen a side. He kept reaching out to them, trying to open a dialogue. He brought his mother flowers, stopped by the butcher shop to see his father, but always received short replies, avoided glances, and a chill disguised as neutrality, as if his presence reminded them of a shame they would rather forget.
This silence hurt more than any accusation. Words could be confronted, but the absence of voice left room for doubt. Did his parents, deep down, also consider him a traitor? With every failed attempt to reconnect, the protagonist felt more alone. At the restaurant, the weight of this loneliness showed. He would spend hours sitting at an empty table, watching the silent dining room like an actor on an abandoned stage. The hopeful energy of opening night felt like a distant dream, replaced by the echo of empty chairs. Still, he refused to give up. In the kitchen, he found refuge. He prepared new recipes, mixed spices, experimented with combinations he wasn't yet brave enough to add to the menu. Cooking became the only way to keep his own flame alive, even when everything around him seemed determined to extinguish it. His brother, meanwhile, was gaining strength. News emerged that he planned to modernize the butcher shop, expanding the business and attracting local investors. The contrast was painful. While one brother flourished, the other fought just to survive. It was as if the whole town had already decided who would come out on top. Lying in bed at night, the protagonist thought about their childhood. He remembered playing in the backyard with his brother, sharing secrets and dreams. How had things changed so completely? When had brotherly love turned into war? His heart felt divided. Part of him still wanted reconciliation, to see the family united like before. But another part knew that reconciliation might never come. And it was in this internal conflict that his deepest pain resided. Holding back tears, he promised himself he wouldn't let his family's silence destroy his own voice. Even if he had to walk this path alone, he would keep moving forward. Because giving up, at its core, would mean giving up on who he truly was. His brother seized every opportunity to reinforce his message about tradition. In interviews with the local paper, he celebrated the family butcher shop's history, describing it as a town treasure. He spoke about generations of hard work, about honor, about meat as a symbol of strength and identity. Every word felt like a subtle jab at the protagonist. Then came the announcement. His brother planned to expand the butcher shop. He would invest in a modern second location, complete with tasting events and partnerships with local ranchers. The project was met with enthusiasm, and many local business owners offered their support. The town buzzed with excitement, as if celebrating a collective victory. For the protagonist, The news landed like a physical blow. While he struggled to fill a few tables, his brother was consolidating his influence. His parents, beaming with pride, couldn't hide their excitement when discussing the expansion. He felt increasingly isolated, as if his restaurant had become nothing more than a discordant note in his family's perfectly tuned symphony.
That evening, alone in the restaurant, he found himself revisiting old memories. He recalled afternoons spent helping his father at the butcher shop, carrying boxes and learning the trade. He also remembered times when he'd innocently say that one day he wanted to cook differently. "That's just childish nonsense," his father would reply. Now that boy had grown up and dared to turn that nonsense into reality. But there was no room for naivety anymore. The protagonist knew his brother wasn't just defending tradition. He was trying to erase him. The restaurant wasn't seen as competition, but as a symbolic threat. This was a battle about identity, about legitimacy within his own family. The weight of his heritage felt crushing. The butcher shop was a local point of pride, a community cornerstone. He wondered if he would ever be seen as anything other than living in its shadow. His struggle wasn't just about attracting customers. It was about earning recognition. His heart swung between anger and sadness. Part of him wanted to confront his brother directly, to expose his need for control. Another part still longed for his parents' approval, still wished to hear a simple, "We're proud of you." This inner conflict consumed him night after night. In the empty dining room, the silence seemed to mock all his efforts. He closed his eyes, trying to picture the future. Could he possibly make it on his own? Or was he destined to be crushed by the weight of a legacy he never asked to carry? And deep in his mind, a quiet voice whispered, maybe it was time to seek help where nobody would expect. It happened on a rainy afternoon when something unexpected changed everything. The restaurant was nearly empty, with just 2 regular customers at a corner table. Then a well-dressed man walked in, looking curious, like someone searching for something new. He introduced himself as a business owner from a nearby town who was interested in seeing the place he'd heard people talking about. The protagonist personally waited on him, offering special dishes not on the regular menu. The man tasted each bite carefully, surprised by the flavors. "I never imagined something without meat could have so much character," he said with a smile. His words were like music to the protagonist's tired heart. As they talked, the visitor expressed interest in bringing groups from his town to experience the restaurant. He said there was something authentic about the place, something that could attract not just the curious, but people genuinely seeking new culinary experiences. For the first time in weeks, someone saw real potential in his dream. In the days that followed, the man kept his word. He brought friends, then co-workers, and soon the restaurant began welcoming customers from out of town. Cars with license plates from neighboring cities started parking outside, bringing life and energy to the once empty space. The protagonist felt his heart coming back to life. It wasn't just about the income, it was about validation. Someone from outside, free from local prejudices, had recognized the value of his work. It was as if a flame that had nearly gone out was burning brightly again.
However, this new growth also drew attention. His brother quickly learned about the unusual activity and didn't hesitate to make a sarcastic comment. "You have to import customers because nobody here will accept you." But behind the jab, there was clear unease. The restaurant was beginning to escape the narrative control he had tried to maintain. His parents, meanwhile, seemed confused. Hearing acquaintances talk about this new development, they no longer knew whether to feel shame or pride. The silence between them continued, but his mother's eyes held a restrained brightness when she heard about customers coming from distant towns. For the first time in what felt like forever, the protagonist felt less alone. He discovered that even if his own town rejected him, there was a world beyond it willing to embrace his vision. This realization opened up a horizon he had never before considered. The struggle was far from over, but now there was hope. And within that hope, a new courage was born. The courage to face his brother not just as a rival, but as an equal. With each passing day, the protagonist felt the weight of the town pressing down on his shoulders. Walking through the streets had become a test of endurance. Sideways glances, muffled whispers, and even poorly concealed snickers followed him everywhere he went. It was as if the entire community had become a courtroom, and he was the defendant accused of betraying his own family. At the grocery store, an older woman remarked loudly, "The son who forgot where he came from." Near the butcher shop, he overheard someone say, "I'd be ashamed if he were my son." These words burned like hot iron. They weren't just judgments, they were attempts to diminish him, to strip away any remaining sense of legitimacy. His brother, growing more confident, actively fed this environment. In public conversations, he reinforced the idea that the protagonist had spit on the family heritage. To him, the vegetarian restaurant wasn't just a different business, it was a personal affront. This narrative found a receptive audience in a town accustomed to tradition. Yet there were also those who quietly admired the protagonist's courage. Some didn't dare visit the restaurant for fear of social disapproval, but they left subtle notes and messages of support. These small gestures acted like sparks of hope in the midst of the storm. The protagonist wondered if it was worth continuing. The weight of the stares, the criticism, and his family's rejection felt overwhelming. Lying in bed at night, troubling thoughts haunted him. Would it be easier to just give up, to apologize and accept the destiny that had been handed to him? But then he remembered the firm handshakes from out-of-town customers praising his food. He remembered the genuine smiles from friends who believed in him. And above all, he remembered the light in his own eyes when he saw his idea coming to life. That memory kept him from giving in. Even so, the town's silent war wore him down. This wasn't just a business competition. It was a battle for his very right to exist. It felt like he had to prove, day after day, that he had the right to be who he was.
In that hostile environment, every act of courage felt like a victory. But every setback, every cruel word left deep scars. The battle was far from over, and he knew he would have to prepare himself for some painful choices. The breaking point came on a rainy night. The restaurant was nearly empty, with just 2 tables occupied. Exhausted, the protagonist was watching the rain streak down the window when he received a visit from an old family friend. The man approached with a serious look and said, "Why don't you just close this place for good? You could still make things right with everyone." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. Closing the restaurant would mean an end to all the suffering, an end to the silent war. It might even mean winning back his parents' love and silencing his brother. But it would also mean giving up the very thing that gave his life meaning. That night, he thought deeply about his situation. He weighed the consequences of each choice. On one side, there was the chance to be accepted by his family again. On the other, the certainty of remaining true to himself. The decision felt like an impossible chasm to cross. The town's silence made the pressure even worse. A few loyal customers encouraged him to keep going, but the empty tables seemed to scream in his ears. The ghost of failure haunted every plate, every chair, every detail of the dining room. In a private conversation with his mother, he tried to find some understanding. "I just wanted you to see that this is part of who I am," he said, tears in his eyes. She replied quietly, "Sometimes love means letting go." Her words felt like a dagger disguised as affection. The protagonist finally understood that nobody would make this decision for him. This was his life, his struggle, his identity,
What was at stake wasn't just a restaurant, but the possibility of living an authentic life. With a heavy heart, he decided he wouldn't close the doors. If it meant losing his family, then so be it. If it meant carrying the burden of rejection, he would carry it, but he wouldn't surrender who he was. The next day, he gathered his small staff and announced his decision. "We're going to continue. Even if we only have one table occupied each night, we'll continue." His eyes burned with emotion, but his voice remained steady. It was the most difficult choice of his life, but also the most truthful one. The battle was only beginning, and he knew the consequences would be relentless. Yet a thread of hope sustained him, the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be.
Tired of enduring indirect attacks, the protagonist decided to confront his brother directly. He went to see him at the butcher shop on a busy day. The smell of fresh meat and sawdust filled the air, contrasting with the calm he was trying to maintain. "We need to talk," he said firmly, standing before customers and employees.
His brother smirked with disdain, as if he'd been expecting this confrontation. "Did you come to admit you were wrong?" he mocked. But the protagonist stood his ground. He spoke about respect, about needing to follow his own path, about the possibility of tradition and change coexisting. "I'm not your enemy," he stated, his voice echoing through the space. His words, however, were met with scorn. "You'll never be more than a footnote in our family's story. I am the legacy. You're just the embarrassment." The cruelty in his tone made the protagonist's heart tremble, but it also awakened a courage he hadn't felt before. He replied with conviction, "I'm not a disgrace. I'm different. And it's our differences that push life forward." Spoken in front of everyone, his words left an uncomfortable silence in the room. Some customers looked away, while others seemed to be thinking. His brother, meanwhile, flushed red with anger. Leaving the butcher shop, the protagonist knew he had crossed the line. There was no more pretending to be neutral. The war was now out in the open, not just within the family, but before the entire town. From that moment on, his every action would be seen as either defiance or resistance. Despite the pain, he felt lighter. For the first time, he hadn't stayed silent in front of his brother. The voice he had once swallowed was now speaking out, even in the face of hostility. He understood that no matter how difficult it became, his dignity was not something he could compromise. That night, he fell into bed exhausted, but with a new feeling. He had found his voice. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he was no longer willing to keep his head down. A few days later, his parents called for a family dinner at their house. The protagonist went with a spark of hope, thinking it might be a step toward reconciliation. He prepared himself to hear criticism, but also to share his truth. What he found, however, was far more painful. The table was set just like in the old days, but the atmosphere was heavy. His brother sat with a triumphant posture, while his parents remained quiet. The protagonist spoke emotionally about his restaurant, about the customers starting to come from out of town, about how his choice wasn't a betrayal, but a new way of honoring life. He hoped for a word of support, a gesture of understanding, but received only silence. His father kept his eyes fixed on his plate. His mother, looking down, seemed to want to disappear. No one replied. The absence of any response echoed like a muffled scream. "Don't you have anything to say?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. The silence was his answer. His brother, satisfied, gave a sideline smile, like someone watching their opponent be defeated without a fight. The protagonist felt his heart break into pieces. It wasn't just his brother's words that hurt him, but the total absence of the family he had always tried to please. His parents' silence confirmed that, to them, he no longer belonged in their world. He left the table without finishing his meal,
tears burning his eyes. The sound of cutlery against plates behind him felt like a hammer, driving home the end of an era. That night, he understood that he had lost something he might never get back: his parents' unconditional support.
The silence weighed heavier than any insult. It hurt like an invisible wound, an absence that bled internally. But it also forced him to realize that his struggle was, in fact, a solitary one. Deep down, however, a certainty was taking root. If not even his parents could validate his choice, then he alone would have to sustain his identity. And that was exactly what he would do, whatever the cost. The days following the dinner were the most difficult of the protagonist's life. He carried in his chest the pain of his parents' silence and his brother's coldness, but also the necessity to carry on. Amid hidden tears, he kept opening the restaurant doors every morning. It was an act of resistance, almost like breathing. Then the promise from the out-of-town customer began to bear fruit. Buses carrying small groups started arriving, bringing curious people eager to try something different. The dining room, once empty, began to fill with laughter, conversation, and colorful plates. For the first time in weeks, the sound of life returned to the restaurant. It moved him to see full tables, waitstaff hurrying back and forth, and dishes leaving the kitchen non-stop. Every satisfied smile from a customer was like a slow medicine for the wounds left by the rejection from his town and his family. Social media also started talking about the restaurant. Photos of vibrant dishes circulated, accompanied by enthusiastic praise. The restaurant's name crossed borders, and suddenly he no longer depended on his hometown's acceptance. His dream was gaining its own momentum. However, this success brought new challenges as well. His brother, annoyed, intensified his public criticism, accusing him of deceiving customers with fads. But now there was a difference. The protagonist no longer felt alone. He had voices beside him that believed in him. In the kitchen, he worked with renewed energy. Every recipe was a statement of identity. Every plate a way to show the world who he was. The restaurant was ceasing to be just a business. It was becoming a symbol of resistance, courage, and authenticity. Even in moments of exhaustion, there was a brightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The struggle wasn't over, but the taste of victory was beginning to take shape. And that taste was sweet, intense, and liberating. The protagonist knew he would still face prejudice and challenges, but he now had concrete proof that his vision could thrive, and that gave him the necessary confidence to stand firm, even in the face of new attacks. In that moment, he understood something essential. He no longer needed to ask for permission to exist. The dream had become reality, and no one could erase it.
The restaurant's success began to echo even within his parents' home. Comments from acquaintances reached his mother, who heard stories of people being delighted by the food from their vegetarian son. His father, no matter how much he tried to hide it, couldn't quite conceal his unease in the face of so much praise. One afternoon, his mother discreetly visited the restaurant. She sat at a corner table, observing the activity. The protagonist, surprised, hurried to attend to her. He served her a special dish, prepared with great care. She ate in silence, and at the end simply said, "It's good." It was little, but to him it sounded like the greatest recognition in the world. His parents didn't change their public stance, but the ice was beginning to crack. His father, still rigid, commented at home that the boy was putting in the effort. It wasn't an outright compliment, but it was more than the deafening silence he had been enduring.
His brother, however, wouldn't accept it. Upon learning his mother had visited the restaurant, he reacted with fury. "You're betraying everything we've built," he shouted, trying to reaffirm his role as the guardian of tradition. But for the first time, his parents didn't respond. This silence wasn't of omission, but of reflection. The protagonist felt that something had changed. He hadn't completely won his family's recognition, but he was no longer seen as just a disgrace. There was now room for doubt, for cracks, for possibilities. The town, once hostile, began to divide. Some continued to criticize him, but others, curious, started visiting the restaurant. The stories from out-of-town customers sparked interest, and prejudice began to give way to curiosity. Even though there was still distance between him and his parents, the protagonist knew he had taken an important step. He was no longer invisible, no longer just the traitor. He was someone who had resisted and was beginning to show results. That night, looking at the full dining room, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. There was no complete victory, but there was progress. And sometimes, progress is more powerful than immediate victory. Time passed and the restaurant became established. It was no longer seen as an oddity, but as part of the town's everyday life. Groups from out of town kept coming, and even local residents began frequenting the place without fear of judgment. The protagonist, once lonely, was now running a business that grew stronger every week. Even so, his relationship with his family remained marked by old wounds. His brother kept his distance, fueled by the belief that the protagonist had betrayed the butcher shop's legacy. His parents, though less hostile, were still trapped in the dilemma between pride and tradition. There were brief conversations, some softer looks, but nothing that meant full reconciliation. The protagonist learned to accept this reality. He realized he couldn't please everyone, that his life couldn't be measured solely by his family's approval. He had discovered the strength of learning to walk on his own 2 feet, even if it meant letting go of certain ties.
On a special evening, he hosted a celebratory dinner at the restaurant. Friends, loyal customers, and even some distant relatives attended. The dining room was buzzing with energy, and as he looked at the scene, he felt a deep, quiet pride. His dream had finally taken root and was standing strong. At the back of the room, he noticed his parents had come. They didn't make a speech or applaud publicly, but the simple fact that they were there felt like a victory in itself. His brother didn't attend, holding firm to his stance of opposition, but the emptiness left by his absence didn't hurt the way it once had. During his thank you speech, the protagonist didn't speak about past conflicts or old hurts. He spoke about courage, the power of having a dream, and how every person has the right to choose their own path and find their own wings. His words were met with emotion, and many people stood to applaud him. That night, as he turned off the restaurant lights, he took a deep breath and smiled. He understood that honoring his roots didn't mean being chained to them, but rather using them as a foundation to soar. And finally, he felt free to fly without fear. The restaurant remained a symbol of resilience and authenticity. And even though the road ahead might still hold challenges, he knew he had found his place in the world. His brother could call him a traitor. His parents might still hesitate in their support. But none of that mattered anymore, because deep down, he had won what he had always been searching for: the right to be true to himself. And so, between the roots that grounded him and the wings that set him free, he found the balance of his own story. This story shows us that no matter how hard it gets, staying true to who we are is always worth it. If this journey of roots and wings moved you, subscribe to the channel now. Here, every story will touch your heart and make you think about your own life. Don't miss the next one. Your own transformation could start with a simple story.